Well, it's wonderful to be here. I thank all of you for coming and the organizers for putting on what I know has been a fascinating conference so far. This is an important topic. It's a topic that's of great interest to all of us in this administration, and I'm hoping that we will have a good and vibrant conversation this afternoon. Throughout this conference, you've all heard of examples of impact investing at work and the growing acceptance of the impact economy. And I know that all of you have done some thinking, and there's been a fair amount of discussion reflecting on the role that we can all play to take these ideas to scale. And that's really the question that we would like to discuss this afternoon. The questions are going to be big questions, but they're important questions. How do we institutionalize impact investment? What is it that we can do to encourage companies and investors to adopt inclusive business strategies in the long term? What we've seen as a result of the financial crisis and the fallout from the financial crisis is that even those who've been championing business for a long time, people like Michael Porter from the Harvard Business School, The Economist magazine, are engaged in a serious debate about the relationship of business to the prosperity of society as a whole. In fact, Michael Porter has argued that business legitimacy is at its lowest point ever, and he's talked about how we can all learn and how we need to learn how to create shared value, in his words, as our best chance to legitimize business again. And this, before we even get started, there's actually a definitional question here, a metaphysical question, and that's because in addition to the term shared value, there's a number of terms that are bandied about, such as sustainability, triple bottom line. But for purposes of this panel, what I thought I would do is try and define shared value in the way that Michael Porter defined it, in his words, quote, as policies and operating practices that enhance the competitiveness of a company while simultaneously advancing the economic and social conditions in the community in which it operates. Shared value creation focuses on identifying and expanding the connections between societal and economic progress. That's a big idea. It's an idea that certainly takes the idea of corporate social responsibility beyond its traditional definition. Now, we've all seen, we certainly see it in government, how market forces, when you combine them with smart government policies, can take millions out of poverty. We've seen it in China, where hundreds of millions of people have left the poverty and have joined the middle class. We see it in Peru, where I just came back from a couple of weeks ago and learned that in the last 15 years, they've cut their poverty rate down from 54% 15 years ago to 27% today. We see it in Brazil, where you have 30 million people have come out of poverty in the last decade. And what we have tried to do at the State Department in the last 2.5 years, at least while I've been there, is to try and work on that intersection of profit and development, to try to mine opportunities where development goals and business opportunities converge. From the government to the grassroots, we all have to work together to take the impact economy to scale. And as you've heard throughout this conference, Secretary Clinton and the entire administration is committed to cultivating the collective action necessary to take the impact economy to scale. And we're already seeing it in our companies as well. We're seeing it around the world. We're seeing examples of companies using multi-stakeholder collaboration to both strengthen their supply chains and to benefit the communities that they work in. I'll give you a couple of examples. One of them is Mars, the chocolate manufacturer. We gave them an award last year. And Mars is working with NGOs, local governments, and even direct competitors to improve the lives of more than 500,000 poor cocoa farmers in Côte d'Ivoire, where they source a large portion of the cocoa that's used by Mars. And to do this, what Mars does is it enlists the coordinated efforts of multiple organizations. It gets the government involved, the Côte d'Ivoire government involved, in order to provide more agricultural extension workers, gets the World Bank involved to finance new roads. Bilateral donors are needed to support NGOs in improving healthcare, nutrition, and education in local communities. And Mars even needs to find ways to work with its competitors on pre-competitive issues to reach farmers outside of its supply chain. And this is just one example. I know that Perry will discuss what Kraft is doing in Ghana, and that will come later. For our part, the State Department has drilled down on economic statecraft and what we call development as a business opportunity, which is another way of talking about that convergence of profit and development. And we're trying to use our convening power to raise awareness among various stakeholders about the business opportunities to be found in work that benefits society and the environment, as well as provides a profit. If you look at the work that we're doing on agriculture, if you look at the work that we're doing on infrastructure around the world, that's development as a business opportunity, and that's something that Secretary Clinton has been very keen on promoting as part of her economic statecraft. So we've got a distinguished panel here this afternoon to discuss these questions. What does the business environment need to look like for shared value to move from a niche concept to a long-term strategy? What can governments do to create the right policy framework? So these are some of the questions that I know that we'll be addressing today. And with that, what I'd like to do is just quickly introduce our four panelists. You've got bios for all of them. They're all terribly distinguished, so I am going to condense a lot of their bios. Our first speaker will be John Podesta. John is an institution in this town. I think it's fair to say. I'm not sure you want to be an institution in any town, but he's very well known to all of you, one of the most influential progressives in the country. He's currently the chair of the Center for American Progress and also the Center for American Progress Action Fund. And under his leadership, American Progress has become a leader in development and in the development and advocacy of progressive policy. Our second speaker is Perry Yateman. Perry is a senior VP at Kraft and is the president of the Kraft Foods Foundation. She is also co-author of the award-winning Get Ahead by Going Abroad, which is a lesson that I should have learned early on. Our next speaker will be William Pharaoh. William serves as Vice President for Global Partnerships and Alliances at Mercy Corps. Mercy Corps, as you know, is a leading relief and development organization with ongoing operations in 41 countries, including in Libya, where I was earlier this week, and where they were in Benghazi yesterday. Is all sorts of issues arose with our security folks and the like, but it's a great organization. Our last speaker is Jean Olwang. Jean is the CEO of Virgin Unite, the nonprofit foundation of the Virgin Group, and is Richard Branson's right hand in the quest to weave together doing well and doing good. So those are our four speakers. We've asked each of them to speak for about 5 minutes each, and then we'll engage in conversation and then have a Q&A period for the audience. So with that, let me ask John to take 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Jose.
Thank you.
And I'm humbled to be on this panel, and the other three speakers are going to talk about real activity on the ground that really is making a difference, and I applaud their work. And I'm sitting here, and I'm going to talk at 60,000 feet about how does government facilitate the linkages that really makes this possible. And beyond the obvious, I suppose, which is to support what Chris and his team and the Secretary's leadership does at the Global Partnership Initiative, I want to kind of segment that into three ways of thinking about government's role in facilitating and shaping an impact economy and reinforcing shared value in the private sector. I'm going to begin by using a sort of iceberg metaphor, which is what's above the waterline, and then I want to talk about what's below the waterline. Most of the conversations, I think, that occur in conferences like this and at this conference are in some ways about the very conscious efforts of government innovations to spur innovation in the private sector and in civil society. It's a very conscious part, I think, as you heard from Raj and you've heard from the other government speakers, it's a very conscious part of this administration's program to think about how you can innovate in government to reinforce innovation in the private sector and in civil society. Of course, it didn't start with President Obama and his administration. I would think that the MCC is an example of that in the last administration, of an idea to change and deliver performance of government that ultimately empowers the private sector and the governments that are the MCC partners to deliver on results. But under Obama, I think it's really become really a central part about the way to think about the delivery, particularly of development assistance and the way we're doing business overseas. Whether it's the Global Partnership Initiative at the State Department or the work that OPIC is doing, we're deeply involved in something that Jim Hickup's going to speak about in one of the following panels of providing with OPIC support risk insurance in the Palestine through Ramallah to provide Palestinian businesses the chance to succeed in a very difficult environment, finally getting off the ground with the support of OPIC, or USAID's development innovation ventures. Those are changes in the way the government delivers services to kind of support private sector innovation. On the domestic side, again, I think that this administration has been extremely active. They created the Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation in the White House. That has parentage at my organization. And one of the partners in this enterprise, Michelle Jolin, wrote the first piece on suggesting this in this Stanford Social Innovation Review, which is one of the co-sponsors of this effort. But that has attempted to focus again on this problem and to support new ideas, including the Social Innovation Fund that's administered by the Corporation on National Community Service, the support for social impact bonds to deliver results. Other places in the administration are that really, I think, are very self-consciously focusing on how you create this value proposition through innovation are places like the Department of Education's Investing in Innovation, so-called I3 fund, which uses stage-gate funding model to push reform. So again, I think this is above the waterline. This is sort of at the heart of the conscious shaping of an impact economy that is being done through efforts and new initiatives inside the federal government. I think it's critical, but I think what's below the waterline is actually quite frankly more important. First, it's the creation of the ecosystem itself. The many ways in which the government either provides support or government programs or government policy end up undermining the capacity of organizations like the ones that are represented on this panel to deliver real results. Obviously, there are obvious examples. For example, the regulation of performance in terms of workplace safety or environmental standards, the banning of child labor, the direct intervention in the private sector economy to produce social value and social results. There are things that were mentioned on the last panel, like information collection. I think that could be very useful, and I think we've just really began to scratch the surface of the way that could produce better results. A current example that I think is instructive is the Department of Education's decision to create a database, a kind of all-university database of return on investment from both for public and private sector and private institutions, for-profit and not and a more traditional nonprofit higher education institutions to look at the results that students are achieving in terms of their aftermarket value that they get from their education. That's, I think, an appropriate role for government and one that can enhance, again, innovation. There's requiring disclosure, not just collecting information, but requiring disclosure from the private sector and managing and shaping things like SEC's efforts to create a platform for the appropriate disclosure of climate risk, for example, I think would be a good example in this arena. And providing conditions, I think the government provides conditions for building the shared value proposition. We've seen recently the enactment of legislation in a number of states to provide authorization for B corporations, which has been, again, the subject here. But that notion of being highly conscious, top of the mind, government policy to shape and impact economy, I think is something that this community, I think, can really influence the overall debate on in government. I would say probably the most important place where the government either creates the conditions for shared value and for an impact economy or undermines and destroys them is in the tax code itself. And I think that if we're now engaged in a conversation, particularly about how to reform the corporate tax code, but I think it will soon follow with a major reform of the individual income tax code. The idea of embedded in that is how do we create competitiveness for U.S. business, particularly on the corporate side, against other countries' tax codes, where investment's going to flow, where are you going to put money, with very little attention paid to different policy interventions that will either create shared value or will reinforce quarterly profits, bottom line, et cetera. So I think the experience that again, the community in this room has needs to be brought to bear to that conversation, which is real, ongoing, and I think critical. There are other ways in which the government, I think, undermines shared value, undermines the impact economy. Probably, again, a classic example that would be familiar to everybody here is global agricultural supports. We're going to hear a lot of examples about what companies are doing to create the conditions for small stakeholders to succeed and for the value chain to be reinforced. Think about what the government's doing to destroy the very value that is being created here, not just the United States government, but governments across particularly the developed world. So I think if we could, I raise all these things because I think if we could really bring these up more into the consciousness of policymakers, not just through the special interventions and the innovation funds and the work that's being done at that above the iceberg level, but that below the iceberg level too. I think we're going to be able to be much more effective in shaping that world that we seek. And then I want to just speak briefly about one last one that gets very, very little attention, which is the government, and I think particularly the federal government, is a large-scale enterprise and needs to be thought of that way. It's 20% of the economy. Now, much of that is delivered through the private sector, but if the government, rather than just thinking about the outcomes of programs, thought about its own enterprise in shared value terms, measured in shared value terms, created the kinds of systems and reporting that we're asking the private sector to do, I think we'd be ahead of the game. It's very little understood, but I think there are classic examples in which when the government has chosen to act as an enterprise that is trying to promote social value, we've had excellent returns on investment. I'll give you one example, again, that's been in the press lately, which, and not necessarily from a positive perspective. President Kennedy and President Johnson, through executive orders before the passage of the Civil Rights Act and Title VII, through executive order, banned racial discrimination amongst federal contractors, which had profound effect on the way private sector businesses were doing their work. Recently, there's been a lot of pressure to extend that effort and those executive orders to the LGBT community, something that the administration to date has said they want to achieve through legislation. I would argue that the model that President Kennedy and President Johnson followed may be the appropriate model in this case, because I think the chances of legislation are dim at this point, and maybe leadership there would be effective in ending discrimination in the workplace across a very broad spectrum of the U.S.-based economy. When you think about trying to produce environmental benefits, the initiatives of the Department of Defense are more profound, if you will, than all of the private sector initiatives that have been touted by individual companies and corporations. A lot of success, and I applaud it at Walmart. But Walmart, in its environmental footprint, as big as it is, sort of pales in comparison to the DoD, which is pledged to produce 25% of its energy needs through renewable sources by 2025, reduce its water consumption by 20%, reduce its fuel consumption on ships by 15%. That's probably as big as an impact as Jigger was talking about through the efforts of the Carbon War Room. So I think that, again, thinking about government as enterprise, applying these same principles and same strategies to the government is really critical. But I think one of the things that needs to be pressed is the utilization of criteria for sustained impact across the whole government platform. And in that context, I think the Office of Social Innovation at the White House has created some criteria for how philanthropic resources ought to be used, how you team government programmatic resources with private sector resources, and they've come up with 5 criteria: outcomes, evidence, learning, sustainability, and scalability. Well, maybe that should be embedded in everything that the federal government does. It definitely probably would have helped GSA in its decision about how they ought to do training. But I think that those metrics ought to be applied to the federal government, and applied at scale, they'll have profound impact. The last thing I would say is there's no equivalent in the government sector to the impact reporting and investment standard, the so-called IRIS reporting equivalent that's being now applied to private sector investment. That, I think, is something that the administration could take up and begin to think about how it looks at its own programs and provides a set of criteria that measure against, again, these criteria that the White House office has proposed. So again, that's at a very high level, but it seems to me that the government does all 3 of those things. It innovates to support the work that this gang and this set of companies is doing. It shapes these markets, and it is an enterprise of itself. So I think that, again, making this top of the mind is really critical. Thanks.
Thank you. Perry?
Wow, that was a lot. I think I'm here. I am the president of the Kraft Foods Foundation, but as I make clear to everybody when I talk to people, I am first and foremost unapologetically a business person. What I love about this audience is normally the whole first 15 minutes of my remarks would be all about justifying that actually when you're talking about trying to solve some of the world's biggest problems at this point, food security, environmental degradation, economic development, you name it, that really no one actor can get there alone. And so I spend a fair amount of time trying to explain how countries and companies and civil society need to work together in multi-stakeholder partnerships in order to get there. In this group, I'm happy to say that probably that entire intro is unnecessary because we're all there, so that's the good news. Whoa, okay, I'm loud on the mic. But I think that, so what I thought I might share is, because I like to be very practical and pragmatic. I think there's a heck of a lot of theory, and there are phenomenal people way smarter than me looking at these issues in depth. But what I try to do is break it down to what are some of the things that I see that are not enabling us to get where we want to get. Which for me is, bigger, faster, better, more, so it's all about scale and speed and impact. So when I thought about that, speaking as a business person, because I think that's probably my biggest role among my colleagues right now, is that there are things when you are either on the side of trying to sell a corporation on an idea that might be a social innovation, or conversely, within a corporation trying to sell the leaders on why would we do this? Because if you think about these are more complicated. They are less proven, they are harder, longer, and most companies are frankly just used to doing it on their own. So when you talk about, even though it's clear we need multi-stakeholder partnerships, this is not going to be the natural place for companies to go. And the truth is, it's not the natural place for any of the actors to go, right? Government can do it on its own, NGOs are used to a different way of working. And I think we need to start with understanding that everybody has a very different agenda and perspective. And I would argue also, and I think Raj Shah made mention of it, we even have a different language. Sometimes I sit in these meetings, and because I've worn several hats in my career, I have a pretty good understanding of the vocabulary across actors. But a lot of times, it's even that you don't even understand the basis of the conversation when you start. So how are you possibly going to get to a shared value outcome when you're not even sure what you're talking about? So I have kind of two lists. I make everything real simple, and I write it down in numerical form for myself. One is, what is it that business can get out of a multi-party or a multi-partner group? And it's, every one of these is going to be unique to the industry and to the business, and so anybody, your own partnerships will vary tremendously, but there are at least 7 that we have found that universally a company could look at, or a group that wants to bring a company in can try to use as selling points to get the corporate, to the table in a meaningful way. And let me just say also that I fundamentally believe that we are leaving way too much money on the table. At the Kraft Foods Foundation, I have about $100 million in cash in kind and time every year at my disposal. But as Kraft Foods Inc., I have about $30 billion at my disposal. So which one of those is going to be a better investment to try and solve the problem, right? I mean, it's very clear to me that I need to get the $30 billion at the table, not just rely on the $100 million. So that's what I'm trying to do. So when I talk to my business people about going into these partnerships, I try to create the most clear and compelling business case that I can. And it's made up of a variety of things. Here are some of them. Creating and opening new markets, right? So it might be a new market within a country we're already in, or this might be a great market entry strategy. So for a fortified biscuit, for example, that we make in many developing markets around the world, if we're trying to get in, one of the ways to do it if you actually have a vitamin deficiency in a market is to partner with somebody, a government, an NGO, whatever, and to get that product to be available in market for a donation or at cost, and then you ultimately can create a commercial demand for that. So market entry is one. Another one is developing new products. The reason we have a fortified biscuit is actually because we were working with the World Food Program and other places, and we saw a need for this. And so it was joint development of a new product that is the same formula basically that they are dropping out of planes today is what our commercial biscuit called Biscuit is that we sell in Indonesia. So you actually can use these kinds of partnerships to create a new product. The third is consumer engagement and preference. And we do this on a ton of different brands. And so whether it is about playing on sustainable, consumers who are interested in sustainable coffee or cocoa, we are the always 1 or 2 largest buyers of Rainforest Alliance or Fair Trade coffee and cocoa around the world. And you can use that pull, which has a clear social dimension, in building preference for your consumer base and creating a linkage there. Employee retention. I don't know how many of you had to interview, recent grads, and for any, soon-to-be grads that may be in the room, the truth is, I haven't interviewed one of them that doesn't care about what the social mission of your company is. They want to work for people where they believe in what that company is doing. They are not just looking for a paycheck anymore. So if you can prove that your corporation is seriously engaging in these type of initiatives where you are recognizing not just the financial impact, because make no bones about it, we are a public company and our number one stakeholder is the shareholder, but if you can do partnerships that truly matter and simultaneously deliver business and societal benefit, that is a great employee retention and recruitment message. And we use that quite aggressively, and we actually get our people involved in the program. So we create opportunities for them to volunteer, to donate their own money, to 2-for-1 matching, all sorts of different things where they can feel personally connected, even if they never get to Ghana or Indonesia or wherever else we may be. Or we work with the UN and we do high-skill volunteering where we actually send people to these markets for several weeks who might do food technology, R&D, and help the local institutions create new opportunities. So improving employee retention, boosting recruitment. Number 6, more robust supply chains. You heard mention of our cocoa work. Basically, I love what Mars is doing. There's a real short story to why is every cocoa company in this. So we are the largest branded buyer of chocolate in the world. Most of you probably didn't think that. Most of you are thinking they're looking at me going Kraft and you're thinking cheese. I get that. We make cheese, don't get me wrong. It's a really big product. But the truth is that outside the U.S., most of our brands, we don't even sell cheese in most markets around the world. We are the largest chocolate, cookies, crackers, candy, gum company. How many of those would you think were Kraft foods? I guarantee you I could find them in your pantry. But that's what we do. And when you think about those crops, right, a lot of those crops happen to be the ones that can only be grown in a very few countries around the world, mostly around the equator. Those countries all tend to be developing markets, and they suffer from political and economic stress. And so here you are, this is the key commodity. I'm not selling a lot of chocolate if I don't have cocoa, right? And Mars sees it, and Nestle sees it, and we see it. And yet, just take the Ghana example, which I won't go into detail unless somebody wants to hear about it later. If you look at the Ghana example, it's a pretty simple equation. The average age of a Ghanaian cocoa farmer today is 56. And the number one thing they're telling their kids is, don't be a cocoa farmer. Okay? So if they're the second largest cocoa producing market in the world for us, it's a very simple equation to watch how the yield and the production goes down. We are a mainstream seller of chocolate. We are not looking for a $10 chocolate bar. So if you are the one who buys the most amount of that chocolate and the yield is going down and there is no second generation coming, well, the supply and demand ratio would tell you the price is going to go up a lot. We're not going to be able to grow. We're not going to be able to do what our business plans say we want to do if we can't improve the overall availability and quality of cocoa in the world. And every one of the major chocolate companies is in the same boat. Because in places like Ghana, you can't own the farm and you don't buy direct. So all of us are engaged in different markets around the world to solve this. So it is a perfect example of where it is fully business self-interest. I make no bones about that. But that the only way to get that business self-interest met is by doing social innovation in ways that are actually going to benefit at the village level. Because this is hectare by hectare, family by family. And the truth is you cannot impose things on these people. And actually it doesn't even work to give them things. We have tried that. There is no value in something you give. So you have to engage them. You have to teach community empowerment. You have to get them to vote on what the social benefits they're going to use their new social premium on. That's some of the work we're doing. So more robust supply chains. Number 7, improve government relations. The truth is, it doesn't mean you're going to get what you want, but at least it means you're probably going to get a decent and fair hearing if you are in a partnership where the government can see that you are trying to do something that truly has a societal benefit at the same time it clearly has a business benefit. Okay? So that's my first list. I'll be real quick in the next one. So if you're sold at all that you want these kind of partnerships, what's the problem? Why is it that they either work or they don't work? Well, we've been in a lot of them. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we're in a partnership with them in West Africa doing cashews. We're doing a lot of work with the World Food Program in Indonesia and Bangladesh looking at childhood nutrition. And then, as I mentioned, our own cocoa partnership in Ghana. These are just some of the partnerships we have going around the world, several successful ones with AID, as a matter of fact. But what we've learned, these are never easy, and they are never simple. And as I said, because these three actors are not natural bedfellows, it becomes quite challenging to put them together. So here are the 5 top lessons that I got out of my years of struggle in trying to do this. The first one is absolutely ensure that all partners start with a common shared objective. It sounds so simple. But the thing is, it's not easy to do, and you need to recognize both objectives at the start. One is, what is the business objective? Be super clear what you're trying to do, and make sure there is a financial and strategic rationale for why that makes sense for your company. Because when the going gets tough, they're not going to stay the course if it isn't. But equally important, you need to be clear what the societal benefit is of what you're going to do. And they need to be transparent, and you need to have them out there so that as the going gets tough on their side, on the government side or the NGO side, they are equally vested. And while you may not be committed to all of the various things that go into these things together, what you are clear about is what your ultimate desired outcome. So get clarity on that. Second one is you got to recognize these collaborations take longer and are more complicated than almost any of the other deals you're going to strike. The Cadbury acquisition was not a simple thing, but actually that was easier and more straightforward than trying to run one of these multi-stakeholder partnerships, at least in my humble opinion. So, and I was deeply involved in both, so I can speak with a little bit of experience. So these are going to be complicated, and they are long-term. I would never go into one of these with less than a 5-year minimum as my time frame. Now, in corporate America or in the political sphere, 5 years is a lifetime at this point, right? And I'm saying that's the minimum because a lot of these programs are going to take 10 years or a generation to actually turn something around. You'll get initial benefit, but to actually complete this circle holistically and systemically, it may take you 10 years, 15 years. So you've got to have the right long set and the right mindset. And you've got to be, again, as compelling so that if there is a leadership change, your effort continues because it is so compelling that even the next set of leaders, whether they be corporate or political, want to continue it. Third, secure and segregate at least your base funding at the outset. Every government goes through tough times. Every company goes through tough times. A bad quarter, and suddenly they're looking at your program that's going to take 5 years or 10 years, and they're thinking, why are we doing that again? So you got to make sure you get it sequestered. And you've got to make sure, again, it goes right back to point 1, that your business case is really solid. Your business and societal case is really solid. Fourth, know that the various actors are going to have different perspectives and, as I said, frankly, even different vocabularies. So expect to spend a lot of time up front working with them, listening, understanding, and getting to common ground. And then once you get there, your relationships are built on transparency, trust, accountability, and then, frankly, make sure it's all put in writing. Because again, you do not know that the individual, and so many of these successes, right, whether it be at the local level or at the multinational level, they are built based on an individual's passion, their idea, et cetera. What happens when that person walks out? Because eventually they will probably walk out. It's just the way these institutions run. So you've got to have it in writing. You've got to have the clarity to get there. And the last tip, I swear I'm almost done, is that you've got to let each actor do what they do best. You were talking about several things that the government can do. I think it is absolutely critical that we recognize, government has a very clear role to play. I'll start with companies. I think companies are about R&D, they're about innovation, and they're about market creation. Some of the partnerships we have, what we are is the guaranteed buyer, because that's all they needed in order to do all the rest of the stuff. If you have a guaranteed buyer, you have some collateral, you have, you have a rationale for the rest of the deal, but you need that guaranteed buyer. And we needed, the West African example, we need the cashews. So it actually is a win for us as well. But you need, that's what companies can do. Local and national governments, that's everything, depending on what type of partnership you're talking about, from infrastructure, risk mitigation, land rights, legal protection, and an overall supportive policy environment. I think tax is a great example as well. Then there's that whole, I heard from yesterday, the missing link piece. okay? That there are things that companies can fund that make sense. There are things that national governments that can fund that make sense. But then there's this whole other bit of stuff that kind of falls through the cracks, which is an absolute underpinning for somebody to succeed. And so if I talk about my village, of cocoa farmers, for example, some of the underpinning things were basic nutrition and healthcare. And extension services and things like this. And I would say this is where we would go to an aid or a DFID or somebody and say, we can do, if the program in Ghana happens to be anywhere from, 15 to 20 interventions that are required to actually create a sustainable, scalable, and replicable system that will continue. If you've got 15 or 20 of them, there's about 5 to 8 that Kraft Foods, the company, can fund. There's about 3 that I can fund with the foundation. But then I take that model and I take it to aid, or I take it to DFID, or I take it to another international donor group, and I say, hey, this is a great place to invest, because with these other partners and with this holistic system, if you wanted to have a good risk bet, this is one to put your money into. And here are the things that we need you specifically to do to complete our circle. And normally, more often than not, that's where you're going to get a yes, because you've got the full program laid out. So I hope that was helpful, but those are some of the things that we've learned that are some of the things that make it challenging to begin these partnerships that I think really can truly change the world, and ultimately, we need them so badly. So thank you.
Thank you. Bill, you've got 5 minutes. Go ahead.
I'd love to get a photocopy of that afterwards. I want to put this day or two into context. The context of an 8-year-old, my son, who's from New England, who, when I told him I was coming down to Washington, D.C., he's an 8-year-old hockey player from New England. He said, "There's nothing good that comes out of Washington."
That's cute.
So, I think it's important. Obviously, I come from a large relief and development organization. I think it's important to look at the landscape of where we are today from the perspective of an organization like a Mercy Corps. And I think there's a push and a pull factor within that context. And if you look at where we have been traditionally as an industry, the landscape started shifting before Busan. We started to see a heavy concentration from USAID, DFID, other bilateral donors focusing in on a much smaller pool of countries, narrowing their resources around strategic interests and around their foreign policy objectives, a natural process that you'd expect in constrained funding environments. You also started to see new players entering into the field: Qatar, India, China, United Arab Emirates, lately Turkey. And they weren't just operating in either business spheres or diplomacy spheres. They were starting to become engaged in development. You look at Qatar in Libya and their interests there. You look at the efforts that China is making in places like Sudan at the moment, and starting to consider how they wrap around development assistance around their business interests. It's in this context that a number of articles began coming out in the press, citing that it was the end of Western development as we know it, and that there was a shift towards something different. And I think that's the push factor that began to create an urgency within the relief and development community. Simultaneously, there was a pull factor, and many folks realized for years that there were multiple flows of resources besides the traditional spigots of bilateral assistance. But when that understanding grew to the vast majority of those of us in the industry, that those resources eclipsed many-fold the traditional resources from government. I think Secretary Clinton yesterday talked about 13% of development assistance actually comes from traditional sources. That's a powerful figure. And we had not, at that stage as an industry, harnessed the remainder of those resources, either through corporations or through diaspora communities. There was certainly an understanding that you have government, business, and civil society, and there has to be a handshake between all three of those. But I think for many of us, for many in the industry, they understood the handshake to have cash in it from CSR spigots or from grant spigots, and that there needed to be a transition in that understanding. Now, my organization, as you mentioned, is in 41 countries around the world. We have about 4,000 staff, the vast majority of whom are nationals of the countries in which they work. And arguably, we've had a bias towards market-driven programming since the beginning. And if you look at our programming in Indonesia, where we wanted to affect the 50,000 microfinance institutions that are out there, we didn't want to set up an additional microfinance institution, so we purchased a bank. And we set up a mezzanine financial structure that allowed rating systems and on-lending, and something that was non-traditional. You look at the way in which we looked at nutrition and how children in Southeast Asia were purchasing effectively fried food that had no nutritional value. And we thought, why don't we create a franchise business model so that those people can spend their cash on something that they want to eat, but also enhances their nutritional input. And that model has expanded and is expanding outward even further as we speak. I think it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine that traditional aid will disappear in its entirety. But this transition to catalytic investment that was talked about yesterday, it's powerful. And for those of us who are forward-thinking within the industry, we welcome that change. And I think it segues to how do you develop those business models in this catalytic environment that allow us to reach the last mile. So enter the concept of shared value, and I appreciate that you raised that at the beginning. We're working very closely with FSG on this concept of shared value within Mercy Corps. Certainly, shared value is not a panacea for all ills that face the world, but it's an important approach. And let me reiterate the quote that you gave at the beginning from Michael Porter. I think policies and practices that enhance the competitiveness of a company while simultaneously advancing the economic and social conditions in the communities in which it operates. From our perspective, that's an important sentence. But the most important piece of that is to actually focus on the problem set first. So what's the challenge that the community is facing that needs to be solved? And is there a market opportunity that evolves out of that problem set? And I know, from Perry's examples, I would agree with her on all of those listed numbers on ways to interface. But I want to underscore that one piece where, as organizations like mine, where we're focused from the community perspective, it is important to understand what their challenges are and what we can bring to bear with market forces that help shift those challenges in a positive way. So we have FSG, as I mentioned, doing a deep dive with us on our shared value initiatives within Mercy Corps, and I have a list also.
Already.
But it's a 3-point list.
That's closer to 5 minutes.
And FSG's helped us to understand that that our shared value programming falls into these 3 distinct categories of reconceiving products and services, redefining productivity in the value chain, and improving the operating environment. So on the reconceiving products and services, just a couple of quick snapshots. I know I'm going over my 5 minutes.
You weren't alone, it's okay.
That's right.
In Haiti, as you all know, we experienced an enormous catastrophe through the earthquake, and the international community responded in a robust way. One of the challenges to resilience post-disaster is the ability for people to rebuild and for the ability to get back on their feet quickly. And an important component of that is insurance. And in understanding what the traditional insurance market was in Haiti, we wanted to reimagine, or globally, we wanted to reimagine how we could become involved. And in partnership with Foncosi, Haiti's largest microfinance institution, Swiss Re, DFID, Swiss Development Corporation, and others, we created a social enterprise called the Microinsurance Catastrophe Risk Organization. And domiciled in Barbados, this social enterprise can effectively operate anywhere, but we chose Haiti as the first place for it to operate. And it combines insurance in a way that is non-traditional. So you take parametric insurance and indemnity insurance, and previously you could buy one or the other, but we coupled the two together and allowed a marriage that was unique in the marketplace and had a market basis that was attractive for the investors within this particular business. I think as you look at the question of redefining productivity in the value chain, we worked with our own internal investment fund in Guatemala a few years back, and we were trying to enhance the productivity of smallholder farmers, improve the quality of their produce. We did this as a pilot, attracted USAID funding to come in and bolster that, and simultaneously attracted Walmart to come into the mix and to look at what we were doing and how it could be effective in their business model. And what Walmart was particularly interested in this context was lowering their transportation costs and increasing the quality of their product that they held in the stores in Guatemala. So there was a marriage between public funding to help build capacity and to help provide technical assistance. There was Mercy Corps providing on-the-ground support, and there was a buyer that was not a required buyer, but certainly an interested party that was investing in the process. And my final example on redefining productivity in the value chain is an interesting evolution of relationships with Google. So Google recognized that there were 88 million people in the Middle East and North Africa, Arabic speakers, yet only 1% of the web content was in Arabic. Mercy Corps has been in the Middle East for years, and we work in a number of countries. One of the places we work is with Palestinians, a well-educated group of people, many of whom speak both Arabic and English. And Google decided that it would be a savvy business play on their part to encourage app development in the Arabic language. And of course, encourage the use of Google and Chrome and YouTube and whatever other piece would then accrue market value to them down the road. They gave Mercy Corps a tranche of approximately $1 million. They gave $1 million to Sadara Venture Capital Fund, which is based out of the Middle East, and in the process made a very long play towards development of a space. Now, they're not going to realize a return on that investment tomorrow, but that return is inevitable if enough app developers come into the marketplace. And then one additional aspirational comment regarding improving the operating environment. Years ago, I worked for the Department of Energy on oil, so I have a bias in this area. But there was mention of the extractive industry and the importance of oil and gas as part of an examination from the relief and development space. The footprint of the oil and gas industry overlaps very significantly with the same footprint that we have as an industry. And one of the important elements within oil and gas is the protection of their upstream operations. So drilling, piping, making sure that security is enhanced. If you can make a credible business case that stabilizing communities where those upstream operations take place, enhancing the economic empowerment of people within those communities provides demonstrable security enhancement, and you can link that to a dollar handle, it's a clear pathway towards a credible business case of securing the operating environment that I think could transcend beyond an individual extractive company. So I've taken more time than I should have, but I think these examples are but the tip of an iceberg, and a lot more examples that can be fleshed out.
Thank you.
I feel really honored to be part of this panel, and I'm very excited because I don't think I've ever met, let alone sat next to a human institution. So, so thanks, John, for that honor. In the mid-90s, I had the great pleasure of working to help set up a mobile phone company in South Africa called MTN. And I'll never forget, we were one of the very first companies to launch prepaid in the world. And we brought in all these marketing experts and asked them about the market demand, and all of them said, don't do it, you're not going to make any money, there's no market. And we did it, and within 3 days, we were scrambling because of demand. And then within the month, we had made our annual targets. So we quickly went into the townships to find out what was happening. And it was the most unbelievable scene of entrepreneurship blooming, where you had people selling phone calls on corners, you had them setting up trailer phones, you had them selling them out of their briefcase, everything you can imagine. And I think for me, that was the moment where I really realized how important it is for business to play a role in lifting people out of poverty and also to play a role in giving them true economic freedom. And I also learned 2 other things during that time. One of them, how important it is to listen to the right experts. The people on the front lines know 99% of the time they know what they need, they just haven't been asked yet. And then the other thing I learned was that sometimes it's really simple. A mobile phone was really simple. I think when we come up with solutions a lot, we complicate it and we add all kinds of technology. I mean, sometimes it is a very simple tool. And the mobile phone, because it was so simple, has now 5.6 billion users. And it, as we all know, has become a doctor, a bank, an insurer, everything you can imagine. I'm still looking, I don't know if Jigger's still in the audience, I'm still looking for those bucket loads of money that came out of the mobile industry, because we could still use those for what we're doing now. But just a perfect example of something simple that radically shifted people's lives. And I can't tell you how exciting it's been to hear over the last couple days to see the stopping of this binary argument between people saying it has to be charity or it has to be investment. It's been so lovely to see that crumbling and see these wonderful, exciting hybrid models that can create, and they're messy models, they're not easy models, but see those hybrid models that can grow in the middle of that continuum from charity to investment. And we've heard about some of those out over the last couple days, and it's something, again, that we're really excited about. How can those help bring some of these solutions to scale? And I think for us, we feel strongly that business has to play a role across really that whole continuum. So even when we're on that end of charity, how can we be looking at things through a business or an entrepreneurial lens to make sure that they're sustainable? And then at the other end, from a commercial perspective, how can we help support these lovely new businesses that are evolving? And we too, just like many of you have expressed over the last couple of days, we struggle with all the definitions, all the different acronyms. So we simply boiled it down to screwing business as usual, which for our company resonates, and for many people out there resonates. And what we've tried to do is look at how do we start, as Raj said, start to really celebrate some of these businesses that are screwing business as usual right now. So one of the things that we did is we built a website to celebrate them, and we've really classified them into 4 different categories. One is value-based business, so businesses that make profit, but they put people and planet alongside profit at their very core. So things like Innocent Drinks, Interface. The second category was purpose-driven businesses, so businesses that go out there and they're starting for a purpose to change something, but they also make profit. And that's organizations like Participant Films, it's Husk Power, it's a number of other organizations like also the Songevity is a fantastic example in the energy space. So that's the second category. The third category is what we call social enterprise, which is actually taking the profit and putting it back into scaling your response to the issue. Obviously, Grameen Bank, big issues. There's a lot of examples within that category. And then the last category, which is the good investors, which is many of you here in the room today. And we feel strongly that traditional businesses are going to be forced to change. It's not a question about profitability, it's a question of survivability. Mm-hmm. And we see 3 pressure points that are really causing that. The first one is brands are no longer owned by marketing teams or communication teams. They're in the hands of people all over the world. The second one is, again, competitive pressure from these new models is something really exciting that's happening out there. And then the third thing that we're really excited about is we're starting to see these leaders like Paul Pullman from Unilever, also Jochen Zeitz from Puma, who invented the EPL model in his organization, or the late Ray Anderson from Interface, starting to see their voices lift, which again is dramatically changing things right now. And I think at the Virgin Group, we're still learning. We are still on a long journey. I think the secretary put it very well yesterday, where we're doing our best to do better right now. And we wanted to create Virgin Unite, which is the foundation of the group, to help our businesses to do better. And fundamentally, from the start, when we began Unite about 8 years ago, the underlying premise of everything we did and still do was business as a force for good. And we wanted to not create a charity, a grant-making body. We wanted to create something that was going to catalyze, be a catalytic engine for business as a force for good in the world. So today, as an organization, we really focus on 3 main things. The first one is we have about 80 businesses across the Virgin Group, and they're in about 15 different industries. So we saw this tremendous opportunity to look at how do we transform these businesses and really put people and planet at the guts of our organization next to profit, so not alongside it. So we've created a kind of a transformation map that goes to 8 points, which I promise I won't go through. We're really, really, really happy to share that with anyone that's interested. And it looks at how you use every single one of your assets as an organization to drive change, because we feel passionately that it has to be at that core and at that very center of who we are as organizations. And we've got loads of examples that, again, we don't have time to go through right now, but I'm happy to touch with anyone if you get a chance to do it today. The second thing we do is we felt strongly that as a global brand, we had a responsibility to start to create the right ecosystems and the right leadership models to really shift the environment so that these new business models could really thrive. And that also we used the power of business and entrepreneurial thinking to really help fill some of the global leadership gaps in the world. So in this part of what we do, we incubate organizations, build them, and then we spin them out to become independent so they can do what's best for people on the planet and not necessarily have any one brand attached to them. So those are things like Jigger, who you saw from that Carbon War earlier, also the Elders we incubated. We're in the process, as Richard mentioned yesterday, of incubating something called the Business Leaders Group and a host of others. And then the third thing, which is probably the most important thing that we do, is we're really passionate about how do you build a community of people around the world who will never accept the unacceptable and are really passionate about really, really screwing business as usual and really making sure that we look at changes and look at solutions through an entrepreneurial lens of how we do things radically differently. And just to close on that, I think in that community of people, I cannot underestimate the importance of leadership. We are really lucky that we have someone in Richard who really put people at the very heart of everything he's done since the very beginning and creation of this brand years ago. And we're very excited about these wonderful hybrid leaders that are starting to emerge, like Jigger, like Mabel in charge of the Elders. We're really lucky we have 2 people from Unite team today with us. We have Andrew Purvis, the COO, who had a long history in the banking industry, and then he was running one of the largest purpose-driven businesses in the UK. Also Derek Handley, who's come on board to really kick off the Business Leaders Group, a very successful entrepreneur who stepped into this role. So again, I'd like to just end on that note that ultimately it comes down to the people that you put in these roles. And I think if you can get the right mix of business skills and the right mix of people that have had experience in building partnerships in government and not-for-profit, that's what will make it work.
Well, thank you. A lot to chew on. Let me just ask one question that I think arose in a number of your presentations. Perry, you spoke of the business rationale for a lot of the work that you were doing in cocoa and in Ghana, and in that case, you needed to ensure that Kraft would be in the long term getting the supply of cocoa that it needed to produce its chocolate. What happens when that business rationale is not there, or that business rationale is going to take a while to develop? And you mentioned the 5-year horizon, which is a long horizon for most of the shareholders that I know. The reason why I'm asking this is, one of the things that we do at the State Department is we run our involvement in the Kimberley Process, which is the conflict diamond in Africa. And one of the issues there is, ultimately you could solve a lot of the violence that goes on in diamonds if consumers banded together and asked for conflict-free diamonds. That isn't happening. And furthermore, there are new markets that are coming on board that really aren't asking for this. And you're always going to have people who want to buy the cheapest product. How do you balance the demands of your shareholders? How do you deal with that 5-year horizon? And it's not just for Perry, for anyone. You've got this on the one hand, your shareholders are demanding value and are demanding dividends, and at the same time, you've got a long-term business plan that sometimes takes a while to germinate. How do you balance that, and do you have any suggestions on how to deal with that? Anyway.
Well, I'll start, and you may not like my answer, but so the truth is, we always say, craft, we're big enough, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. And so the answer is, I don't engage in something where I don't have a compelling business rationale from the beginning. I start from that point. And when I look at the millions of lives, maybe billions, but at least the millions that we can directly improve by doing what we're doing, even with the stuff that is what I would call low-hanging fruit, the obvious things in supply chain, for example, for us, in procurement of raw materials like cocoa and coffee and cashews and dairy and all the other things that we need. We start there. I will also tell you we have done extensive footprinting around the world, and I think we are the only company that has so far mapped every single input from farm to fork in terms of its impact simultaneously on land, air, and water. And when you look at it, you might think that the biggest impact on those things from us would be in manufacturing or distribution or whatever. It's not even close. It is all about the raw material supply. It all happens on the farm or in the soil. And because of that, I can also say that while there's strong business rationale there, it is also where making change there, I can create the single most good in society, both in terms of reducing our environmental footprint and waste and all the rest of it, as well as, as I said before, of the 1 billion people in the world that are malnourished or, below the poverty line, et cetera, 700 million of them are farmers, smallholder farmers. So we buy from thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of them. And so how can we focus there? So we don't actually try to tackle something that doesn't have a business rationale. I think that is really hard to do. And I think that even if you can sell it by your own force of will and the right partner starting out, it will ultimately, you won't make the 5 years. So I would advise you, look for something that is core to your business, non-negotiable. Start there. Once you get enough models and enough people in the company that care about it, then I think you can expand and you have more license to operate. But today, I stay core.
John?
Yeah. Well, I think your example, Jose, points out the fact that the private sector can do a lot, but it doesn't necessarily can't do everything.
Absolutely.
And I think the conflict diamonds is an excellent example of a place that consumer awareness can change behavior. The ability for civil society to organize against companies that are going to continue that trade is critical. But at some point, there may need to be intervention outside of a private sector framework in which you're talking about the value proposition of what a ring costs. And I think that's an appropriate place for both international intervention, government intervention. And Jigger said on the last panel that it's good for people to make a crap load of money solving these social problems. And I'm kind of inclined to agree with that, but I think there's some limits in which the pursuit of a crap load of money has other kinds of social problems that can only be really solved by the intervention of governments or of citizen organizing. And I think that's a pretty good example of a place where the private sector may not have the solution to that question.
I think that's an excellent point about how we define profit, because that hasn't necessarily come up, I've heard in the last couple of days, about that equity issue. And I think that's a really, really important point that we all need to think about as well. That's good.
We've got time for a couple of questions. if you have a question, raise your hand or go to the microphone and identify yourself. And I may just take mic right here. I'll take a couple of questions at first, and then we'll just answer them. And I'm afraid that will be the end.
I'm not trying to move the conversation to another subject. I've been in this international business for a fair amount of time. But I have a question that sort of tees off what the Secretary had said yesterday about this $12 trillion opportunity for markets that we're all hoping to develop over time. And at the risk of sounding a little jingoistic, I'm wondering about the U.S. nexus here. You know, what we're talking about, I think, is just what John had mentioned relative to, you know, government, the U.S. government in this particular case. What is it we can do, whether it's OPIC, whether it's USAID, whether it's the Commerce Department. I'm looking at Jan here, for example, who's with the Remnants of Shore Bank, which stood out as an example of a model that was exportable that worked in your hometown. You know, it sadly fell victim to the same thing a lot of us fell victim to. But my question does cut to that, and that are there models that are here? I mean, our economy grew on these sorts of things and falters on some of the problems as a result of it. But I'm trying to, is there a nexus, whether it's the UK, whether it's the US, where success here or experimentation here, where there's a whole range of supports, might make a difference to what happens overseas?
I'm just going to take a couple of questions,
okay.
and we'll...
This is just a question for Kraft and Virgin. You spoke about conflict diamonds and how consumer choice had an impact on that industry. And I'm just wondering about how much preparation or thought goes into not only in recruiting and retaining the next generation in terms of social consciousness, but in terms of consumer demand, and whether there's a thought that it's even large enough from the populations that have that rise in social consciousness that it will actually impact the business bottom line, and if that goes into your planning as well.
Last question.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rosario Londoño, and I work for the Inter-American Investment Corporation. It's part of the IDB Group, the Inter-American Development Bank. And we're exploring an initiative to support MAP and support and create a network of intrapreneurships, because we have found in our work experience in working with large corporations and the SMEs in the value chain that when you want to instill or promote the kind of models that Kraft is doing and other companies are doing, it comes down to the individual. And many times, these individuals don't have a network. They don't have a lot of the list that you have mentioned here of how do I actually do this? How do I sell this to my management? How do I sell this to investors? And I guess that for me here, one is to let you know that we are doing this. We're partnering with Ashoka. We're looking to partner with other of the people who are in this space to promote this. And also, if this already exists in the type of work that you're doing, is there already something out there that you're working with Virgin Unite? That is there something similar about identifying already who these people are in these companies and really being able to empower them and channel some sort of financing products that they can then go and take their models to scale? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody, please?
Just to respond to the last two questions. To your question just now regarding, is there a resource? That's one of the reasons why we wanted to build this Group Business as Usual website, because we also found a gap where there wasn't one central source. So right now we have probably about 90 case studies up there of businesses doing fantastic things. And one of the things we're trying to do is also put tools and links to organizations that are already doing great stuff. Because like B Corps, there's so many amazing organizations out there that are doing it. It's just all very scattered right now. I mean, also one of the reasons why we wanted to start the Business Leaders Group. So we'd be very happy to share and also learn more about your partnership, because it sounds like there may be some great stuff that we could do together on that. And then just in response to the customer question, Javier, who started up Better World Books, has a lovely quote where he said, every purchase is a vote for or against a new way of doing business. I think that's such a gorgeous summary of we feel passionately that the customer is going to have more and more power. So it's something we certainly take into consideration. And one of the things we're trying to do with our businesses is stop looking at customers as customers and start looking at them as part of your community and have that two-way conversation with them. So it's a real shift that we're trying to make internally right now.
I can pick up on that question as well in terms of consumer. It is, we have a group at the World Economic Forum that I'm part of right now about sustainable consumption, because at the end of the day, it's kind of like, you have that last mile of 7 billion consumers in the world. That is the power. I mean, beyond any government, beyond any company, that is the power. And if we can motivate and then deliver products and services that they want that are truly better in a social dimension or environmental dimension or all of the dimensions, then we know that is a huge source. The problem is that the research will also tell you that for the number of people that say that they want to buy a product that is better, if you will, in its social values, that so few actually follow that to action. And it varies tremendously market to market. In the UK, it's a lot higher number. In the US, frankly, we are a laggard. I happen to be married to a European, and he's one of those rabid Danes who are very out there. Yes, you can imagine. He's also all organic and everything. Trust me, it's fun at home. And P.S., he's a chef, okay? So really, it's a good time. But, it's one of those things where, I look at that, and Europe is always about 15 to 20 years on these types of things ahead of the U.S. Now, I'm hoping we're going to close that gap, okay? Let us not take as long this time. But what we need to do is we need to find ways. One of Kraft's strategies, and we went here early, and there was a lot of internal debate about this when we first made this approach. But our sustainable coffees and chocolates and whatever are not niche products. We said we don't want to charge more for the sustainable version versus the non-sustainable version. Because we said we know we will never get to scale if we do that. Now, the truth is, we are pushing everybody, Rainforest Alliance, Fair Trade, all the partners we can get, whatever, because there's simply not enough supply in the world to meet Kraft or, for cocoa or coffee or any of this, because our numbers are so big. But we have taken some of our main lines, like Kenco in the UK, and every single jar of Kenco sold in the UK, and actually now it's in an environmentally friendly pouch, every one of those is sustainably sourced, the whole line. And it's our biggest coffee brand in the UK. And it's the same price. And so that's part of our motivation, because we do believe that if consumers are offered a brand that they know and trust, that has for us, it's all about the flavor. Nobody, whether you're talking about a diet or sustainable or whatever, no one is going to buy a food product that doesn't taste good. You will buy it once. You will try hard to buy it twice to do the right thing, right? But the third time when your family goes, I'm not touching that, Mom, it's not going to go anywhere, okay? I also have an 8-year-old, trust me, she's not eating it, okay? It has to taste good. So what we are trying to do is figure out how do you deliver something that tastes good, that has an improved footprint, and that can be mainstream priced. That is the challenge. And that's when we will get the consumer to make the leap. Because if you can offer that, I believe they will come, even Americans.
Just to answer the first question really quickly. Look, I think innovations here are absolutely exportable. Sometimes directly, sometimes by observation and movement. I'll give you two quick examples. Very successful City Year program in the social space, exported to South Africa very, very successfully. In the commercial space, we ended up innovating around how you finance distributed energy and energy efficiency through what are so-called PACE programs. Started in Berkeley, spread to a bunch of cities, kind of collapsed with regulation from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and their regulator. But it's now being adopted across the world in both developing and developed countries to attach the financing for innovation in distributed energy to the underlying property values through the tax system. So yeah, I think there's a lot of innovation that takes place here that can be modeled and exported, and people pick up good ideas, and vice versa. We have to look globally, just the way business looks globally, to innovations in regulation and policy making, and import them into the U.S.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. We could go on for a while. I appreciate it. And then let's give a hand to our panelists, please.
Just to tell you, we're going to go to our breakout sessions now. We're going to start 15 minutes early. They are going to start at 3:15 and not 3:30, so please join us.